So last week, we heard the amazing and beautiful story of how God's love was revealed in the account of Noah's Ark. We learned that there were many flood stories in all the cultures surrounding the area at that time. There were even flood stories that had people building boats to try to survive the flood. Noah's Ark story was written at a time in ancient history when humanity believed that the gods, that is, the powers of the universe, were really, really angry with humanity, and they were out to get us. But Noah's version of the flood story was different, dramatically different. It started out just the same as all the other flood stories, but then it took a turn. Noah's story is the only story at that time in history which revealed God's desire to reach out to humanity, to love us, to care for us, to save us, to forgive us. God made a covenant, that is, a promise with us to bless us, not destroy us for the rest of eternity. And God sealed this promise with the sign of the rainbow. So what happened after the rainbow? Did everybody live happily ever after? Well, we just heard from Diane tell the story. When Noah got off the ark, we hear that he became a farmer of grapes for the purposes of making wine. And apparently it was a very good wine, and Noah enjoyed it immensely. Unfortunately, one night, Noah drank a little bit too much of this wine and passed out, naked as a jaybird, as they say. Noah's youngest son, Ham, saw Noah in this way and started laughing and giggling, and he called his brothers in to look at their dad as well. Well, the other two older sons, Shem and Japheth, had a little more wisdom than their little brother, and so they had a little more respect. So they saw what was going on, and they walked into the tent backwards so they wouldn't see their father, and they walked in backwards carrying a blanket, and they covered Noah's nakedness. When Noah awoke and heard what had happened, Noah was livid. Absolutely livid. He was so angry that he cursed his son Ham. And not just Ham, but Noah cursed Ham's entire bloodline forever and ever. Amen. Now, in the ancient world, cursing was a big deal, especially if it came from your father. Cursing was way more than just words. It was your future. To be cursed was devastating because it stayed with you. It haunted you. It hung over your life like a storm cloud for the rest of your life. So Ham was cursed, which meant Ham's son, Canaan, was cursed. Now, perhaps you've heard of the Canaanites in our Bible who never passed up an opportunity to beat up the Israelites. So Ham was cursed, Canaan was cursed. Canaan's son, Sidon, was also cursed. Now, Sidon was a very fertile young man, and he had a great many offspring, so many, in fact, that Sidon became the father of a nation himself. And we hear about this nation over and over again in our Bibles. You heard Diane mention it in our gospel reading. We hear it throughout the whole Bible. And the people from Sidon were called the Sidonians. And they, too, never passed up an opportunity to beat up and oppress the Israelites. Isn't it interesting how this whole thing started with a father angrily cursing his son, and how the hurt festered for generations until the son's nation ended up beating and oppressing the father's nation. If a hurt isn't dealt with and eventually healed, it goes on to affect more than just the person or persons that were originally involved. You see, wounded people wound people. This is a theme that we see played out in our movies, in books, in music, to our very day. We're still telling the same stories. We're still seeking the same revenge. We're still working through the same pains as Noah and Ham. Thousands of years. Many things have changed, but some have not. So going back to the Sidonians, some you may know of from our Old Testament. Okay, you may remember famous King Solomon, the wisest king of Israel. He had like 3,000 wives. And so many of his wives were Sidonian women. And wise King Solomon was led by these Sidonian wives of his to worship their goddess, Ashtoreth. Okay, a few generations after King Solomon came the Israelite king Ahab. Now, King Ahab married a Sidonian princess by the name of Jezebel. Ooh, that woman was trouble. Many of the prophets in our Old Testament, including Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all predicted doom for the Sidonians because they were just terribly, horribly immoral. So maybe you can see by now that the Sidonians in our Bible were the bad guys. They were the evil empire, the mean oppressors, the nasty ones from across the track. Prejudice against the Sidonians weaves itself all through our Old Testament and our New Testament. It got to the point where Israelites, or otherwise called Jews, would not set foot on Sidonian territory, and they would not talk to anybody who came from Sidon. When hatred and bigotry have hundreds of generations to fester, like it does in our Bibles, these things of hatred and bigotry can become deeply, deeply entrenched in people. So it's no surprise then when the Israelites, or the Jews, started to say some kind of obnoxious things. See, the Jews were quite confident that they were the good and faithful ones, that they were the chosen, that they were the ones, and them alone, that God loved. They would say things like, well, we're in, Sidonians are out. We're on God's side. The Sidonians are not. And then came Jesus. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, we read that Jesus went into Sidon. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, we read that Jesus had conversations with the Sidonians in which he was amazed at their faith. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, people from Sidon came to Jesus, and he healed them. And today, you heard from Diane read out of Matthew 11, that Jesus went through his own towns of his own people, but Jesus' own people rejected him. They would not receive his miracles. So Jesus said to them, you know what? Sidon is going to be better off. The evil enemy is going to be better off on the day of judgment than for you. According to Jesus, it was better to be a Sidonian rather than a deeply religious person who looked down on others, assuming filth was in their hearts. Arrogance, hatred, bigotry, intolerance, these things are killers, people. They are killers of families, of communities, of nations. They are killers of our very souls. And sometimes we carry them for generations. We carry them for so long, we don't even know. We can't remember who or what started the conflict. What we need are conversations, understanding, humble curiosity, grace, and forgiveness. This is what is necessary to bring healing to a long-felt hurt. Just imagine for a moment what it would have been like if Noah and Ham, his son, if they would have talked it out, if they would have intentionally done something working towards mending the brokenness between them. Imagine the positive changes that would have reverberated through history if they had only done that. Get curious. Get curious as to what really happened. Get curious about the one you call enemy. Look at the incident that happened between the two of you and try to see it from their perspective. Soften your heart with empathy and compassion. Then forgive. 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 May it be so for you and for me. Amen.